mean, if I'm from private sector, I'm looking at my bottom line here.
They're affecting our society, right? And we don't get to decide how we get to be affected.
Now, how can we claim that we are transformed if we don't even own our data, basically?
Why are we not building technology for Africans? Welcome to the Angle podcast. This is something we've brought to you where we go behind the stories that are published in our publishing partners, the Mail and Guardian and the Daily Maverick. And myself, Earl Joseph, and Stanley Moloto over here, my colleague, we get to talk and disagree and agree and shout at each other about interesting things.
Nice.
Yeah?
How you doing?
Good.
The coolest grey beard in town.
No, so one of the things we thought we'd bring into this is our beverage of choice, right?
And I'm wondering if you swapped my drinks, man.
No, so I drink alcohol. You don't.
Yes, but I'm not sure which one is alcohol and which one is not. Trying to get me.
Well, the water is not alcohol. You've got. I don't know.
This is water and something else, and I'm not even sure what that something else is.
It's juice.
Just gotta trust you on this one.
Yeah. So funny story is I was bringing like a really expensive bottle.
Don't.
Which was going to be on display over here. And I'm really clumsy, so I smashed it on the way here.
Oh.
Yeah.
When you say expensive, what do you mean? How much are we talking about expensive?
I don't know, like $1,000.
Sheesh.
I know, and it was a gift.
From who?
No, we're not going to say that part because then I'll be calling myself out and I will be cancelled in my family.
So how much is this bottle then?
Oh, that's some cheap ass shit. That's like, I don't know, like $100?
What's the difference between an expensive one and cheap one? Do you not get drunk from both bottles?
Nobody drinks to get drunk.
What do you drink for?
For taste.
Damn.
Yeah, well, I drink for taste. That's what I tell everybody. No,
so you drink wine for the same reason we drink juice.
Juice tastes terrible. That's like just sugar and water and flavored by a grape.
Oh, boy.
Actually, that's not too different to the wine. But...
Look at you.
Okay. Listen now. So we're going to go behind some stories, right?
Right.
And that's why we call the angle. So...
Make I try. It is not alcohol.
Well, mine is. So this will loosen me up for my first ever podcast.
Hopefully you get drunk on set. What's our first story?
Right. So our first story was something that was written by Prof. Geshe Karuri Sabina and the then head of the department at WITS, School of Governance.
Yeah.
I think it's called the Tayarisha Center for Excellence. And that was Prof. Mzukisi Qobo.
Oh.
And they set us off, on a bit of a journey on digital governance, which kind of sounds boring.
It's governance.
It's governance. But it can be interesting, right? Especially if we start going behind the scenes of what they were trying to say. I mean, often a lot gets lost in the research. But I think for me, what the real issue around this was governance for transformation. Now, you and I both are kind of like digital avengers, right?
You can see I'm on my Avenger soon.
Yeah. You realize you're supposed to look cool and not me, right?
Do I not look cool?
You see, my daughter made this for me. So. But
I want this in a bribe.
So digital transformation on the continent, the way I understand it, right? Or the way they presented it in the story was that it's not only about using digital services and products, right?
Yeah.
So everybody, when we talk about digital transformation, everyone thinks about using technology,
right?
social media, like banking and fintech and all of those kinds of things. And what they brought to the fore in the story, some of which I kind of agree with, but some of which I think might be stretching.
Right.
Which was, it's also about the way they say it was overcoming socioeconomic divides and the delivery of public services and...
Interesting, just complicated terms. Do they even explain what digital transformation is?
Well, that's what they're saying, right? It's not just using digital
but
stuff.
What is it if it's not just?
Well, Can
you say to me, this is what digital transformation is and this is what it looks like? As you would to a 6-year-old. How would you explain this to a 6-year-old? This is digital transformation and this is how you would see it all.
Are you talking about whether we go like into what digital means?
What digital transformation, the two put together, what do they actually mean? When something is digitally transformed, what does it look like? So if we were chatting, we've been transformed. If we're talking cell phones, we moved from sending letters to conveying message digitally.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So that's some form of digital transformation.
It's analog to digital, right?
Right.
So if we're saying that you're going from, like you're saying, writing a letter to email, that's digitalization, right? Or the digitalization and transforming.
Right.
So if you look at the way, say, the global north has moved, right? A lot has moved into the digital sphere, right?
Yeah.
When you look at where Africa is relative to what everybody else is doing around the world and where the economies are going, where skills, work, where our kids are going to be operating, right? That's what we're talking about, transformation, right? And the problem with trying to move that forward is that if the people who are charged really with creating the environment in which that can happen are not digitally oriented themselves, and who are those people? Right. So according to them, according to Prof. Geshe and Mzu, the issue is that the governments, African governments, are not geared towards creating an environment. And a typical example, I imagine, the way I'd see it, is that if you think about, say, social media, for instance, right? Or just what do you call this, banking or financial, the electronic movement of money and that sort of thing. Are governments in Africa really able to regulate that shit? I mean, that's not. Can't. Are they capable?
They're not capable. They don't even understand the technology. It's almost like, how do we even expect them to regulate or even keep up with the regulation? Some jurisdictions will regulate, some wouldn't. How do you keep up with the technology that's constantly changing? Worse, how many governments actually own the infrastructures upon which this technology runs? And how do you expect private to come and aid in that regulation? I mean, if I'm from private sector, I'm looking at my bottom line here. How the hell are you expecting me to go, okay, cut me off here, and how do I make money?
Well, that's true. I mean, that's what one of the things they're talking about, right? Is that, let me see what they're saying, was that a digital society shouldn't be determined by the technology.
Okay.
Right? Which is difficult because digitalization in most other countries has been led by the technology. And that's why you have like congressional hearings on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
That's why Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys are called before the Congress to explain things.
Wait, but
like,
if it's not determined by society, then who determines it?
No, it's not determined by the technology. It should be, according to them, it should be the way the society is organized. So the technology and the regulation should operate around that. And that's difficult.
I mean, where would the technology come from?
Well, that's another question.
Yeah.
Right? Where is the technology coming from? Now, you remember we were at a conference the other day.
Right.
Where everybody sitting on those panels were talking about how they had gone off and done their masters and doctorates at Harvard, etc.
Yeah.
And then they came back, and you were a bit worried that I was going to be annoying.
Well,
which I was. But
as always,
the fact that one of those highly learned individuals sitting on the panel said they didn't understand the difference between the digital networks.
Right.
Digital equaled internet. Right? And that's why, because when you go north, what is digital? Digital is internet.
They've had cable for the longest of time.
Right. And who laid down that cable? Primarily governments, right? You come to Africa, and the first digital touch points we had weren't internet-based.
Yeah.
They were GSM-based, right? So SS7, SMPP, all of those kinds of protocols was the first way in which Africans really touched the digital world.
Right.
And I'm talking about the average Joe. Not the businesses, not government officials, etc. I'm talking about the average Joe in the street. So how should Africa and African countries interpret digital transformation? How should we look at it? Clearly, we can't look at it from the West. Well, I don't know if we can't look at it from the West, but I think it should be, well, in my view, it should be a migratory path.
You mean from your angle?
Oh my God, that's so on the nose. But when people talk about digital inclusion, right? Everyone talks about digital inclusion. They start defining it in terms of what everybody in the global north considers digital inclusion. Right? Whereas I'm saying there are so many legacy technologies that can deliver a lot of these applications that people are using right now. Right? But what are the barriers? And that's where the governance issue comes in. Because quite frankly, if you think about it, we outsourced our digital infrastructure in the 90s to a lot of the mobile network operators, right? So between them and the tower companies, they laid out the infrastructure.
What was that organization that laid the pole lines?
The undersea cables.
Locally. There were, in the 90s, there were those poles and lines.
What used to be the Post and Telecommunications. That wasn't a company. That was a department, government department.
Post and?
Telecommunications.
Oh, that's what divided into post office and telecom.
Essentially, if I remember correctly.
Oh.
But they didn't really get to lay down cables for the whole country. But South Africa in particular has its own issues, right? Because of apartheid, etc. But then came the 90s, and we were so desperate for everyone to have access that we just went, okay, cool, you guys have got the capital, roll it out, and we'll just try and regulate it. And then I was at Africa Tech Week a couple of weeks back. And I asked one of the commissioners from ICASA, and I said, so why don't you make the legacy digital footprint available to people who want to build applications? And he was like, well, our regulations are antiquated, right? And he was honest. I mean, he was a commissioner and he was honest. But the fact is that we are digitally included.
Right.
But we're included only in terms of the, what is it? Like what do we call them? Like the gatekeepers. And who are the gatekeepers?
So we're only included to participate in the market as customers.
Pretty much, it would appear.
Yeah.
Right?
So we're not included to transform necessarily. Well, we're only allowed to transform as much as you partaking in the market as a product. Or consuming
as a consumer,
of a product.
But a consumer of what? And if you think, who dominates the markets in Africa? Who dominates?
So you use a product and you are the product.
At the same time, yes, that is true. But who dominates the digital markets?
It's telcos.
One, the telcos, the mobile telcos. And two, what they call the over-the-top players.
Right.
Like the Facebooks, the WhatsApps, or Meta, basically. YouTube, and then the Netflix, X, etc. They all come in and sit on top of those networks. And then we're expected as consumers to just use those things, right? What happened to us making a lot of that? If we want to transform the continent for Africans, why are we not building technology for Africans? And the answer is it's built and we're using it, but only a few people get to build it and earn from it.
What's locally built?
What do we have that's I don't know. But we used to have Mixit, remember? Long before WhatsApp came in.
Facebook.
Long before Facebook, we had Mixit, right? So that was locally, but in the north or in the west, there's a lot going on in the fintech space, right?
Yeah.
So you have Flutterwave, etc. Come in, and those kind of guys come in because of the lack of digital banking available. Well, lack of banking basically. So moving money becomes an issue. But that it?
That still doesn't quite say. I mean, are we transforming, or are we led to transform? If we are transforming, shouldn't we transform by ourselves, or should we be led by a narrative from the global north? Because if we're going to use all these platforms you're talking about, that is us consuming. That is not us necessarily partaking.
Well, some of these things were built locally, right?
But you're build on what?
But you're a web developer, right?
But we don't build on local platforms. We build on international platforms. So that data still sits on servers offshore.
Well, not all of them, but I think as a web developer, let's just think about it, right? Yeah. What's your market really?
People who need sites, small business, hustlers here and there, basically somebody who needs an online presence. And where does that presence live? It doesn't live locally. I'm here selling you a site. Look, you need to digitize your processes in the business. Let's get email going. Let's get interaction happening. But all of that is built on technology that does not sit here. As much as we're saying we are transforming your business, which we are, but what are we using to transform that business? Which begs the question, is Africa digitally transformed? Using resources that are offshore, that data is not... Our data sits even on servers offshore. Few of those data centers are here locally, but a lot of them sits offshore. Now, how can we claim that we are transformed if we don't even own our data, basically?
Well, what it's saying is that it's complex and complicated, right? The levels of digitalization is complicated.
Sure.
So, for instance, when I look at it, I think of you building websites, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking, how many people actually go to a website, right? On the continent.
Right.
Because if you think about it, let's just bring it right back down. So a lot of people use as metrics, they'll say there's lots of people with smart devices.
Yeah.
What can those smart devices do? Well, they can access the internet. What is accessing the internet? Is WhatsApp the same as getting to a website? No, right? But WhatsApp and going to a website are both accessing the internet. You see what I mean? So once you start going down and looking at the various layers of interaction with digital interfaces, you realize, or the digital world, you realize that Africa is still way behind. Even though a lot of people, like even GSMA will say, that there's 50% penetration of smart devices in South Africa, for instance. And you go, well,
what's the average device?
But why? Then you start looking at what kind of devices, right?
Space,
how much space do they have? Battery life, data, the cost of data. And then you start realizing that the limitations for transformation and using certain applications, that's where I go back to applications. I mean, we were back at that other conference at Tech Week Africa, I was saying you can use AI in the back end. Because that's obviously the big thing, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of those things. But do you have to deliver it over an internet-based interface?
True.
Not necessarily, because it's just the data input.
That's still, AI chat is still, it's a whole other chat, I guess. At the CX thing in Sandton the other day, forget his name, Clint, also mentioned that employ AI in the back end. But how do you deploy such a technology if nobody, in the back end West, if nobody really understand what it is? You still don't know how much you can trust it. How do you put it into the back end to deliver on the front?
And that brings us back to
regulation,
governance, understanding, and more importantly is that when you start talking about regulating, you got to have highly technical people involved in this.
Do we get those in the government?
Well, that's the thing. We had people at the Civic Tech conference.
Africa Flow.
Yeah, and I was sitting there going, I am not a technical person. How am I giving technical advice? I shouldn't be. If my previous employer had to hear me talking there, he would have lost his mind, right? He would have just been like, Earl is giving technical advice? No. And that, for me, is worrying because not only are the government agencies not ready.
Right.
The civil society is not ready, but who knows the technical backends best?
Private,
right? So they get to determine how we transform, right? And that's
a problem.
It is. I mean, if you think about it, like one of the things that the story really I thought was interesting was they brought in this issue about digital governance in a time of crisis.
Yeah.
Right? So that was things like, what is it, Arab Spring, COVID, financial crises, Ukraine, Israel, all of these kinds of things, right? How does that affect the governance and the use of technology in those times? Like Ushahidi came out of the Kenyan election type, you know, right? We sat with the Ushahidi guys and said, do you understand the back end and the technology?
This is life. Don't put them on blast like that.
No, I'm not going to blast them. I'm just showing that without regulation,
right,
the anonymity that whistleblowers think they have,
they don't have,
right, because of the nature of clear text, on SS7 using USSD. Then I was like, the only thing that stops government and an MNO colluding, a mobile network operator colluding, is literally just whether or not I can make money or the regulatory frameworks don't exist to create Chinese walls.
Yeah. So what do we need for digital transformation? We get the part that we don't own the infrastructures. We are building these technologies. We're slowly turning our lives, moving from analog devices to more digital devices. We're no longer doing a lot of paper. We are on smartphones. So we are transformed, whether we like it or not, to some extent.
Yeah, we're forced to.
Yeah.
But the question is, are we doing it deliberately or are we just reacting?
We are reacting.
And that's the problem. And I think what I liked about what Geshe and Mzu said was that, well, I don't suppose they said it out loud, but the one part, and this is why the Angle exists and the Digital African, which is our parent company, exists, is to hold those people, the gatekeepers, the regulators, the companies, the digital providers, hold them to account. Because they're affecting our society, right? And we don't get to decide how we get to be affected. We just simply, we get a device, we look at it, and then there's like a whole bunch of apps, and we tap it.
And none of those apps are developed locally.
No, absolutely, right?
Even if you go into parliament, everybody that whips out a phone,
right,
90% of those apps are all offshore.
Right, and then, so the idea is let's hold them to account, right?
Yeah. But how though? I mean, they don't understand this thing.
Well, I think
it's like a chicken and egg thing.
But I think from our side, if we start looking at it and exposing this, I mean, we're finding people are not really engaging with this kind of discussion, right?
Right.
That's why we started this whole thing, was that if we can get them to engage, and then encourage them to talk to each other.
Perhaps.
I mean, a perfect example was that when we were sitting at that Civic Tech conference, I didn't see any government people there.
None.
I didn't see any private sector people there. Like, why was there no panel discussion where you had the Department of Communications or ICASA, as well as
perhaps therein lies your answer.
Where?
The fact that none of them are there.
Yeah, but
they can't be on the same stage because they know what they're doing.
Well, I mean, I was very, like, I think it was about 10 years ago, I was in Tanzania.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic because the minister at that time was complaining about the, what do you call this thing? The cost of data, etc. Yeah. And then you had the undersea cable guys, you had the MNOs.
Yeah, that speaks to a lot of political will, which is clearly what we don't have.
Well, he had it, right?
Yeah.
So he said, well, if you're not going to make it cheaper, I'm going to lay down my own cable.
Yeah.
And he did.
He had the money to do that.
He did, but he didn't last very long.
All right, man.
Which also speaks to other issues. But yeah, in the end...
And we got to shut it down, though,
so,
right?
Right. So in the end, it's about holding them to account and getting them to work together somehow.
Yeah, only they can sit on a table and have a chat. Government and private... private hopefully would play fair and not just consider their bottom line.
But well, let's see. Maybe we can get them in here.
Right. We swap chairs. Sit here, they sit there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching the Angle podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share. The link to the article will be in the description below. Be sure to check out our other shows for Frame of Reference and the election series. We just concluded the election series with Tyrisha Vet School of Governance. And the beautiful furniture that you see here, it's thanks to the Daily Store. Joey, we see you. Thanks.